Hey everybody, and welcome to the 5 Bytes Podcast. I'm your host, Rory Monahan. Coming up on this week's episode, Windows 11 is closing the gap between it and Windows 10 in terms of usage. Also, vulnerabilities in a popular application management solution for macOS and iOS apps has left Apple customers exposed to potential attacks for 10 years. And a mixed week for AI, with teases of big things to come from OpenAI, whilst people are also openly criticizing a recent high-profile AI creation. For this and more, keep listening to this episode of the podcast, which of course, as always, is brought to you by my sponsors. And that includes ControlUp, end-to-end digital experience management for the work-from-anywhere era. ControlUp, happy users, happy IT. And also brought to you by Network's Policy Pack, where you use Group Policy, Policy Pack Cloud or MDM to remove local admin rights, manage and lock down applications, Java, browsers, and mitigate ransomware, plus more. And of course, also brought to you by Numescent, the inventors of the first and only cloud-native container management platform for Windows desktops. If you enjoy the show each week, you have these awesome sponsors to thank. And now for some news. Vulnerabilities pertaining to a popular application update management platform for macOS and iOS applications have been recently highlighted after research team EVA Information Security published exploits for the vulnerabilities. Now, luckily, these vulnerabilities were patched all the way back in October, but there are some pretty serious implications for Apple customers potentially. The researchers discovered that the vulnerabilities were present in a trunk server used to manage CocoaPods, which is a repository for open source Swift and Objective-C projects that acted somewhat as an unofficial Apple package manager or even a Kubernetes equivalent going off their naming convention. Roughly 3 million macOS and iOS apps depend on this package manager, but unfortunately these vulnerabilities may have left Apple customers at the mercy of cyber gangs capable of carrying out supply chain attacks. This is because typically, as developers make changes to one of their pods, dependent applications typically incorporate the updates automatically through their app updates, typically with no interaction required by end users. A cyber gang could hypothetically have injected their own nefarious code into applications that were then automatically distributed to users with no user interaction at all. Researchers created and shared exploits for CVE-2024-38366, 38367, and 38368, which Ars Technica reports are vulnerabilities that go back 10 years. So while the exploit has only just recently been published and these vulnerabilities were patched back in October, if some cyber gangs were aware of these vulnerabilities before the public disclosure, it is possible they were used to steal data or launch attacks on Apple customers. Cisco have patched a vulnerability listed as CVE-2024-20399, which is an NX-OS 0-day, and it was exploited in April attacks to install previously unknown malware as root on vulnerable switches. Cisco says the vulnerability can be exploited by local attackers with admin privileges to execute arbitrary commands with root permissions on vulnerable devices' underlying operating systems. The list of impacted devices includes multiple switches running vulnerable NX-OS software. That includes MDS 9000 series multilayer switches, Nexus 3000 series switches, Nexus 5500 platform switches, 5600 platform switches, Nexus 6000 series switches, 7000 series switches, and 9000 series switches in standalone NX-OS mode. LeapyComputer.com reports the security flaw also enables attackers to execute commands without triggering system syslog messages, thus allowing them to conceal signs of compromise on hacked NX-OS devices. Cisco has advised customers to monitor and change the credentials of network admin and VDC admin administrative users regularly. Admins can use the Cisco software checker page to determine whether devices on their network are exposed to attacks. Cisco also warned that a state-backed hacking group has been leveraging multiple recent Cisco vulnerabilities in their campaigns, So it's a good idea to get patched and stay safe. Juniper networks have released an emergency update to address a maximum severity vulnerability that leads to authentication bypass in Session Smart Router, Session Smart Conductor, and WAN Assurance Router products. The security issue is tracked as CVE-2024-2973. An attacker could exploit it to take full control of the devices. I'm sure this is why it's getting the maximum in terms of severity. BleepingComputer.com reports that while Juniper have stated only routers or conductors that are running in high availability redundant configurations are affected by this vulnerability, it won't be much comfort, as this is a configuration that will be common to enterprise customers. So the good news is there are fixes for all three of these products with various different versions, and I'll share a link to the article that lists the versions that you want to be on for each product with this episode, which is episode 341, and you can find that at 5bytespodcast.com. But Cisco has assured customers that the application of these fixes does not disrupt production traffic, and it should have a minimal impact of roughly 30 seconds of downtime for web-based management and APIs. No workarounds are available for this vulnerability, and the recommended action is limited to just applying the available fixes. TeamViewer users have been warned to monitor their connections and enable multi-factor authentication after vendor RMM Software shared that a Russian state-sponsored hacking group known as Midnight Blizzard is believed to be behind a breach of their corporate network this week. The breach was reported to have occurred, or at least been noticed, on Wednesday, June 26th, and they say the breach was of their internal corporate network only, not their production environment. It has been reported the breach was carried out using an employee's credentials. So while BleepingComputer.com are obviously encouraging people to enable multi-factor authentication and monitor their connections, the vendor, the maker of TeamViewer, has come out to kind of quell concerns and say that it was only their internal network. But as we've seen with similar breaches in the past of internal networks, there can be sensitive information pertaining to products on corporate internal networks of these vendors. So this is a story, like many others, that may have legs, and it could just evolve in the coming weeks. So let's keep an eye out. Citrix DaaS has received an update that includes an option to update the memory and disk cache size of the write-back cache. This option is available when machine creation service storage optimization is enabled, after the catalog is created for MCS catalog in the hypervisors. This update also brings enhancements to the Session Performance tab. The Session Topology section of the Session Performance tab is enhanced to include Wi-Fi signal strength metrics, throughput incoming and outgoing, network interface type, and link speed. There's also a machine uptime alert enhancements and an infrastructure right-sizing page, plus, in my opinion, the coolest update of all, a local host cache activity dashboard. So for me, that would have been very useful when I was working day-to-day in Citrix environments to see when local host cache mode became enabled, because when it actually does its job and it works, users aren't going to report an issue if the connection to maybe the delivery controllers to the database go down, because local host cache mode saves the day and everyone's able to continue their sessions and connect no problem. Personally, in the past, I'd set up my own custom reporting, looking out for certain event IDs, but it seems with this dashboard, you won't have to anymore. That saying of, if a tree falls in a forest but no one is around to hear it, did it make a sound? That kind of applies to local host cache mode. You may have a problem in your environment that's causing a disconnect, but you may not be aware of it if users are not reporting it. But with this dashboard, you can become aware of those problems and address them accordingly. The Connection Reliability tab in Azure Virtual Desktop Insights is now generally available. With the feature, IT administrators can now monitor the connection resilience between users and Azure Virtual Desktop host pools. It gives administrators a simpler experience when it comes to understanding disconnection events and correlation between errors that affect their end users. So this seems like a feature that's kind of a given that you should have, and it's good that it's now generally available for AVD customers. In sad news, Bruce Bastian, one of the creators of the popular WordPerfect word processing software, passed away recently. At the height of its popularity in the 1980s and 90s, WordPerfect was the leading provider of word processing software for the personal computer industry. Although he was best known for co-creating a word processing application and co-founding the WordPerfect software company with Alan Ashton, he was also a philanthropist, lover of the arts, and a key figure in Utah's LGBTQ+ community. The latest Steam hardware and software survey states 46.63% of gamers who use Steam run Windows 11. While this is obviously just gamers, they do make for a significant sample size of non-enterprise Windows users. The latest figure of 46.63% is not ideal, as Windows 11 has been available for several years now, but it does show growth, albeit slow growth. This is a good sign as Windows 11 continues to close the gap on Windows 10, which currently sits at 49.42% of gamers. With Windows 10 end of support arriving October 2025, this is at least a positive trend in the correct direction. In bad news for all of us, Ars Technica has reported that Google's greenhouse gas emissions have surged 48% in the past 5 years due to the expansion of its data centers that underpins artificial intelligence systems, leaving its commitment to get to net zero by 2030 in doubt. Their chief sustainability officer, Kate Brandt, said the company remained committed to that 2030 target, but stressed the extremely ambitious nature of the goal. Meanwhile, the company's data center electricity consumption has outpaced Google's ability to bring more clean power projects online in the US and Asia Pacific regions, which suggests currently there is no way they can meet their targets despite what their sustainability officer has suggested. Google's data center electricity consumption increased 17% in 2023 and amounted to approximately 7 to 10% of global data center electricity consumption. Its data centers also consumed 17% more water in 2023 than during the previous year. This is something I talked about briefly in my recent AI session of the Cloud Paging user group and on previous episodes of the podcast. The generative AI technology is cool, but it could not have become mainstream at a worse time. We were collectively behind on sustainability targets already without this increased resource consumption that Gen AI services require. So it's putting us all at a really bad spot. Apple's VisionPro headset went on sale outside of the US for the first time, with Japan, Singapore, and China the first to get them. A second wave is reported to be coming on July 12th, with the headset rolling out to Australia, Canada, France, Germany, and the UK. Considering previous recent reports of poor sales, I'm surprised they didn't offer them in other regions sooner to at least bump up their sales figures. It'll be interesting to see how well received these devices are in other regions due to the extortionate cost. In good news for macOS users, OpenAI's official ChatGPT app for macOS is now available on macOS Sonoma or later. Ars Technica reports it doesn't support using the API, which, to be honest, I don't see as a big deal. You can use it in the browser if you wish, but surely most who want to leverage the API will be doing so within their own code anyway. I have to say the slowness from OpenAI to release apps on popular platforms such as iOS, macOS, Android, etc. has been a bit surprising. I know the iOS app came out a few months ago now, but before it was released, there were a bunch of unofficial apps scattered across the web, duping people into using them. So the slowness really hurt unsuspecting customers who were probably paying a subscription and just wanted to use the service from an app. But hey, an app is now available on macOS and available across most platforms now, so that's good. Speaking of ChatGPT, WindowsCentral.com recently reported on statements made by OpenAI CEO Sam Altman about a future GPT-5 release, with Altman claiming it'll be a significant leap forward, perhaps in comparison with its predecessor GPT-4. In the past, Altman indicated GPT-4 kind of sucks and referred to the model as mildly embarrassing at best. Now, GPT-4 is one thing. Obviously, the more recent version is GPT-4o, so presumably he's not calling his recent baby ugly, and it's really an attempt to encourage people to use the latest GPT-4o, which is not widely available through other platforms that are aggregating the OpenAI service, as far as I could see, at least not yet. Altman said, quote, I expect it to be a significant leap forward. A lot of the things that GPT-4 gets wrong, can't do much in the way of reasoning, sometimes just sort of totally goes off the rails and makes a dumb mistake, like even a 6-year-old would never make, end quote. The CEO compared the development of its large language models to the iPhone, saying that the first iPhone was still pretty buggy, but it was good enough to be useful for people. Altman says the AI revolution won't require new devices, which potentially indicates that the tech will be cloud-based, which obviously places this counter to Microsoft's moves with Copilot Plus PCs. So it'll be interesting to see if there's a continued divergence between what OpenAI offer versus what Microsoft offers while leveraging OpenAI's products. Toys R Us in the US recently published a new ad, which they announced had been created with an ad agency called Native Foreign to create what it calls the first ever brand film using OpenAI's new text-to-video tool Sora. The ad tells the story of Toys R Us founder Charles Lazarus using AI-generated video clips, and it meshes in Jeffrey the giraffe as a toy giraffe and a kid, and you can watch it for yourself anyway. It popped up on my social media before I saw the reports, and most of the feedback from people that I could see was negative. A lot of it was filled with expletives, so I'll go with the mild comment to give an example, and this one's from comedy writer Mike Drucker. He said, quote, "Love this commercial is like Toys R Us started with the dream of a little boy who wanted to share his imagination with the world. And to show how, we fired our artists and dried Lake Superior using a server farm to generate what that would look like in Stephen King's nightmares." Ars Technica reported that while Sora eliminated the need for actors and cameras, to be successful with what it generated, it still took human script writers and VFX artists to fill in the AI model's shortcomings. This has been my experience with graphic and video generation. What it produces is far from a finished product. Now, I will say that Sora, which was used for this, is not actually publicly available yet, so I have not been able to use it, nor has anyone else, I guess. But with the products that I have tried to use, there are a lot of problems. It might give you like the foundations, but then you might have to remove certain clips and tweak things, change the captions, that sort of stuff. Personally, I thought the Toys R Us ad was fine. There were moments in it where it looked a little off, like, the way you could tell with still pictures generated by AI of people, where it just looks too slick and maybe slightly caricatured. You could see some of that in the ad. And there were also moments that was noticeable to me in the ad where like the angle and depth of field of the giraffe toy against the background it was against seemed odd. But honestly, it's still better than some other ads out there that I've seen that were not generated using AI. So while there's been a lot of negative feedback on the ad, I doubt they really care. Them being the first gets them the attention one way or another, which is, I'm sure, what they were going for. So, like I said in the headlines, mixed week for AI. People are not really happy with the results of it here for this ad. And the resource utilization it requires is putting us in a very precarious position. But hey, GPT-5 sounds like it could be better than GPT-4o for what that's worth. But now this episode's scripts, tricks, and tips. First tip this week, I saw that Wolfgang Sommergut shared a blog post on auditing group policy changes in the event log using XML queries and PowerShell. So if you'd like to use PowerShell to get that kind of data, check out this blog post and I'll share a link with this episode. I also saw the Lazy Admin published a blog post on enhancing your security posture with Entra ID audit logs. So obviously more and more organizations are embracing Entra ID, so this might be one that interests you too. The awesome Chrissy Lemaire posted a blog post on how not to bomb a presentation about AI. Chrissy goes into recently doing a presentation at an event covering some AI technologies, and just the fact that like right before the event, she was going over what she was going to do and the data was terrible. And she goes on to explain kind of what happened and what the lessons learned were, which, I did a presentation on AI 2 weeks ago and I tweeted about it the day before I was doing the session, basically stating the same thing where the results are really inconsistent. So when I'm doing a live demo, who knows what's going to come back? Is it going to be usable? Is it going to be what I planned? For me, I kind of just said that to people as I was about to do the demo. I was like, this could go very wrong. because it's inconsistent, and that's one of the problems. Now, luckily for me, I was able to work with what it outputted. I think something didn't work from what I remember, but I was able to just manually adjust it. And on that point, I saw Chrissy is also a contributor on a project for PSOpenAI. So if you'd like to use OpenAI's API using PowerShell, check out PSOpenAI, but also check out PSAI. And this is the new version or new module that works off of its predecessor, PowerShell AI, that was created by Doug Fink. This is one that I've used in the past, and I saw that the update was just posted, I think, on the 29th of June for this module, and the previous PowerShell AI module is no longer available. So again, yeah, if you work with PowerShell and you want to try using OpenAI's API with it, check out these PowerShell modules. But that's it for this episode of the podcast. I feel like next week's episode may be an early week episode. It might be published on Monday or Tuesday, possibly Tuesday. The reason being that I have to travel for work next week, and that always disrupts things. So yeah, just thank you all so much for listening as always, and I'll catch you next week.